So now it is my honor to introduce our panelist moderator, Dr. J. Keith Motley. Dr. J. Keith Motley served as the Chancellor of the University of Massachusetts, Boston from July 1st, 2007 to June 30th, 2017. Currently, Dr. Motley serves as a tenured professor in UMass Boston's College of Management and has taught the leadership capstone for doctoral students in the College of Education and Human Development for 12 years. Previous to his appointment as Chancellor, Dr. Motley served as Vice President for Business, Marketing, and Public Affairs. Prior to joining the President's office, he was the interim chancellor of the University of Massachusetts, Boston, where he previously had served as vice chancellor for student affairs, following more than 30 years in higher education administration that included 10 years as dean of students at Northeastern University. It's an honor to have you here, Dr. Motley. Thank you so much for hosting as moderator. And next, I'm going to transition to Jackie on our board, who is going to continue with the introductions of our panelists. And I need to make sure that Go ahead, Alyssa. I'm sorry, Jackie.
It's for bed soda.
Hi all, thanks and sorry about that technical difficulty. So I'm excited to introduce Dean Kenneth Elmore. Kenneth Elmore has served Boston University as its Dean of Students since 2003. In 2016, he is elevated to the position of Associate Provost and Dean of Students. A native of Brooklyn, New York, Dean Elmore has over 30 years of experience in higher education administration. Prior to becoming Dean of Students, Dean Elmore worked with orientation programs, student activities, and residence life. He also practiced law in the Boston area. Dean Elmore has earned an AB in physiological psychology from Brown University, a Master's of Education, Higher Education Administration from Boston University School of Education, and a JD from New England School of Law. In 2019, Elmore was named a NASPA Pillar of the Profession, and in 2016 was named an ACPA Diamond Honoree. I'm excited to also pass on to my colleague, Jessica, who will introduce Alana, another one of our facilitators.
Hi everyone, I am excited to introduce Alana Anderson as our next panelist for this afternoon. Alana is Boston University's inaugural Director of Programs in the Office of the Associate Provost for Diversity and Inclusion. In her role, Alana works to develop a broad slate of programs that address issues related to gender, race, social class, sexual orientation, nationality, political ideology, disability and justice, among others, for faculty, staff, and students. She works collaboratively with key stakeholders across BU and the city to develop creative, expansive programs in accordance with BU's commitment to diversity and inclusion. Alana has over 10 years of experience working in the field of higher education and has previously held leadership roles in student life and diversity and inclusion at Babson College, Bentley University, and MIT. Alana holds a doctorate in higher education from the Lynch School of Education at Boston College, a Master's of Science in Higher Education from Indiana University, and a Bachelor of Arts in Politics from Brandeis University. Her research examines how Black college women perform their race and gender in social media. I am now excited to turn it over to our next board member to introduce. And Becky, I apologize, I have no idea who's next.
I believe that's me next on our list. Thanks, Jess and Becky. Hi, folks. Nick Cubita here from Northeastern, and I am very excited to introduce one of my colleagues for many years and a friend of mine, Brianna Savigny. Brianna has been working in higher education since 2003, first in housing and residential life at Eastern Connecticut State University and Assumption College, then shifting over to student conduct at Johnson & Wales University in Providence, and now Northeastern University in Boston, where Brianna has worked for the last 8 years. In July, next month, she will become the Director of Community Standards at Tufts University. Brianna has been doing presentations and trainings related to social justice topics since her time in college, and has done sessions for private groups at colleges and universities and for professional organizations locally, regionally, and nationally. She received her bachelor's degree from University of New Hampshire, a Master of Science in Counselor Education with a focus on student development and higher education from Central Connecticut State University, and is now anticipating a Master of Legal Studies from Northeastern University School of Law this coming August. With that, I will now pass it off to my colleague board member, Alyssa, to introduce our final presenter.
And I wish she would be unmuted. Oh, Alyssa, are you on?
Yeah, okay, here we go. I was muted. I'm excited and honored to introduce Faustina Cuevas. Faustina was born and raised in the North Shore of Boston. She did her undergraduate and graduate degrees at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. At UMass, she studied psychology, Spanish, and higher education. Being a first-generation college student and woman of color opened her eyes to the inequalities that exist in the educational system for people with marginalized identities. It was in college where she became very passionate about social justice and an active change agent in the fight for equity. Faustina is constantly seeking to grow and learn and places herself in spaces and around people who challenge her to be better. Social justice is at the core of who she is, and she brings this energy to her clients through her consulting work. And I'll turn it back over to Becky.
Okay, thank you so much. So we are officially kicking off our panel, and I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Motley. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Becky, and to the board. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to come back home to Student Affairs. You know, I've never left, but it's so great to be back among you for this Massachusetts event around NASPA, an organization that I grew up in, and an organization that I love. I also want to say thank you to my dear Camacho for facilitating this opportunity for me to have the immersion in your love today. And to the panelists, in particular, my brother and friend, Ken Elmore, also to Alana. Thank you. I'm also a Boston College Lynch School person, so grateful to be around you today. To Brianna, thank you so much. And to Faustina, thank you for being on this panel today. I know that we only have a few minutes on this panel, and we're going to break up into these mini sessions so that we can all have an opportunity to unpack. But I wanted to at least set the tone and then start out with one question that I want to ask. And then, as was noted, we'll take some from the chat, and I have a few more that I'll add along the way. And so just like you, I've waken up every day for the last 3 months, sort of in pain about what's going on in higher education and around the world, and particularly with our students, and just have been so concerned about that, and you know, the impact of injustice as it's being revealed, not only in some of the disparities that we see in healthcare, but as it's pivoted to its disproportionate level in the economic sphere. But then when we talk about race and how it's impacted us as individuals as people of color, as Black folk, and others. And so I am so honored to be here for a discussion with my colleagues about navigating race identity and positionality. And so thank you for allowing me this opportunity. What I wanted to do was start out with a question, since I am, and I'm honored to have served as someone who's in student affairs, and of student affairs, who never forgot that institutions should remain student-centered. But I also know I've sat in that leadership role, and I know how that is as a leader of a university. So let's start there. What role, and I want to ask this to all of the panelists, and then we'll sort of go into a phase where we can have a couple of you answer this or a couple of you answer that. But I wanted to start out by asking you, what role do you think institutional leadership, like the presidents or the others who are in leadership, should play in supporting Black professionals, people of color, to be successful in their roles within our education? What is the role that you think that leadership should play? How do they set the standard? So who wants to start out with that? Why don't we start with you, Ken? I see you, why don't you start out with that one?
Sure, love to. You know, I think that there are a variety of roles. You know, certainly one of the big pieces of this that I think we often overlook is the role of healing. It's important, and I think we go past it too quickly. And I do think that someone who is in a leadership role at an institution, particularly at an institution of higher ed, has to do that. And keeping in mind that an institution of higher education has got a real specific purpose in the world, right? It's leadership that's got to come from an intellectual space, because that's what we do. We know how to teach, we know how to learn, and we also know how to, I guess, leverage our influence a bit. But I would say that, you know, part of what a person's got to do is to be less academic. And when I say be less academic, it means, you know, not just actively listening, but I've heard terms like generously listening being an important piece, but also speaking from the heart. I think that, you know, we have gone so long in this country for so long, not just in higher education, but across the board, in a very technocratic way of dealing with things in a very engineered kind of way. And I think that, you know, part of what the moment, of course, now calls for, and I think it's pushing us more and more, is to really think about how we heal. And how we heal is that people need to listen and speak from their hearts. I think that's a really important piece. And then, you know, I think there's this other important piece too, and that is trying to do the soul searching that institutions need to do. Soul searching is important. We sometimes don't do that out in the open, but I think that's an important piece, is to let people know that you're soul searching too, that we are thinking about, you know, how we move forward and how we move forward as society. And then, you know, the hard part's always going to be, how does that person communicate to the community, and whether or not it even matters. That's that other piece too that's important to think about too. So those are just a few things that I think are real key and important here.
Thank you. So Faustina, what are you thinking?
Thank you. Oh, the host had me muted. No, I'm really glad that you called on me, because I think what I was already processing goes along with what Dr. Elmore just said, which for me, I think that soul searching, really evaluating, self-reflecting as leadership, what you could do is really important. And once you lock that in and say, these are the things that we need to work on, what does that action actually look like? And for me, having worked in higher ed for over 10 years, I think it's really important for leadership to assess, do we reflect diversity? Are we racially diverse? How can we do this work authentically? How can we say that we want to support staff and faculty of color, BIPOC folks? How do we say that authentically when our leadership doesn't even reflect any racial diversity? So I do think that their universities moving forward really need to take a hard look at themselves, especially leadership, and say, how can we change this moving forward? What decisions do we need to make about how we change as a leadership? Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of things you can do, but when you don't identify within a community, it's going to be very hard for you to understand those lived experiences. You need to bring those voices to the table. They need a seat at the table if you want to see really strategic and intentional changes going forward. And for me, that's really where it starts. Like, I've had these conversations. We've been here, right? We've been here. And personally, I am exhausted by these conversations, in the sense of, we talk about what needs to happen, we say what needs to happen, and then, you know.
Exhausted. We can't have you exhausted.
Right. Exactly. So, you know, really thinking through, okay, what Dr. Elmore said, let's reflect, let's do that soul searching, and then come back to the table and say, what drastic changes are we willing to make right now? What can we commit to right now that is a tangible change action that people can see that we're trying, and not in the sense of just talking. That action piece is necessary.
So we need to be bold enough to ask the questions. We need to be about healing. We need to have the kind of position within the institution to not only say it, but to organize for it and all those kinds of things. So what are you thinking about, Brianna?
Thank you. A lot. I feel like my brain is very full of things these days, as a lot of us are talking about. For me, I think this is twofold. First, on an institutional level, being able to acknowledge, sort of going back to the initial statements of acknowledging our humanity, and the fact that college presidents or leadership councils, just because they're educated and very well established in education, don't necessarily have all of the answers, and will need to rely on the experts they have hired as members of their educational community, whether that be faculty members, student affairs professionals, and really having a diverse array in terms of perspectives, experience, what people are actually doing at the institution, and making sure that that's not all people who are in positions of power, but including people who are in a variety of roles at the institution who might be able to give you some insight. For example, having facilities people who are probably experiencing different levels of racism or structural oppression within the system might be able to give you some different insight. I would also say to look at an external position, given the power and privilege that comes with being at a top leadership position at colleges and universities, especially in New England, where we have so many, to be able to network with other college presidents, other leadership positions, to talk about what our responsibilities are on an institutional and systemic level. This is not something that can just be done at an institution. They cannot change that singularly. They can change the culture at their own institution, but also on a very high level to be looking at this at a national level of what are the systemic issues within higher education that are built upon systems of oppression that we need to address on a really large level.
And so I want to get to Alana.
Thank you. I think I echo a lot of what the other panelists have said. I hearken back to Ruth Simmons, who's the president of Prairie View A&M University in Texas. She's a phenomenal researcher and thinker. She was formerly the president of Brown University, and Prairie View is a historically Black university. And she put out a statement. She was one of the later statements that came out, presidential statement. And her statement was a mixture of recognition of the times and reflections on the times, but it was also action and it was forward thinking. And I think that my expectation of institutional leadership in this time is to think radically, to think differently, to engage in thinking and action that examines these issues at a systemic level and goes beyond just thinking about diversifying people. I think that that's important, and I don't say that in light that that's not an important component, but I think that these issues in higher education are so rooted fundamentally into the ethos of higher education. You know, higher ed was not created for me. It was not created for me as a Black person, as a woman, right? And so I think we really need to be thinking about these issues from a systemic, foundational place rather than just from what is working at the time. And I also would challenge institutional leaders to stop thinking about it in the way that we always have, because those ways don't work. And so how do we invite the thoughts maybe of activism, the thoughts of radical change into how we organize this work better in a way that can be sustainable and effective, because I don't think it is currently.
So how
You know,
do we,
if I could jump in for a sec, Keith, you know, one of the things too that you had mentioned that I think should be on your list of these sorts of things, and maybe to think this through a little bit, you know, I do think that as institutional leaders, we can be full of ourselves. And I also think as institutional leaders, we don't always believe the values we espouse. And so, you know, that's got to be an important piece. You got to believe this stuff in order to, you know, in order to think big, in order to think radically. And I do believe that we have to think big, but you got to believe in that stuff. And you got to not think about yourself and be so full of yourself to do that. So, I mean, I you know, I know that's a bit controversial, but those are a couple of those things that are really key. And it's not just an institutional leader. What's that?
I don't think it's controversial. Right. I think that's right on point.
And it's not just the institutional leaders, it's all of us. I mean, student affairs thinks a bit much about itself too, right? And we don't believe the stuff that we espouse or live it either. So I think it's you know, it's got to be a big picture sort of thing overall. And we are.
So how do we have these real conversations?
What's that?
How do we get down to the point where we can have real conversations with each other about the work? Part of it is what we're doing today, but what are some other ideas around that? Because that's where I was hearing Alana go there, you know, that this notion of saying it and not organizing for it, not speaking up against it when you see it because of where you are in these radical conversations need to happen. But how do we have them happen safely, as my colleague Jane Freed is asking, as I see on this on the chat? How do we have these conversations? And how can someone feel safe?
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I thought that might have been hypothetical, but I can start to answer. I think that folks of color, Black people have been talking about their experiences in higher ed for a long time. And I think that it's important that they're believed, that their experiences are believed. And I think that that's the first piece of how this work gets done. Believe what folks are saying about their experiences and not, you know, sort of naming things in the way that we do, that when someone leaves an institution, they weren't the right fit, or all of the things that we start to the lies we start to believe about our organization and how great we are, and how the outlier, usually who's the person of color, is the outlier, right? So I think that we have to sort of change a little bit of our norms and our notions. I'm gonna say two things about this. I think we have the conversation when folks lean into being uncomfortable, folks lean into maybe saying the wrong thing and getting called on that and then adjusting their behavior. But quite frankly, I think that I'm conversationed out. I think that these things happen, we mobilize, we have conversations, and then nothing comes of it, or very few things come of it. And so I think that it needs to be more than a conversation. And I would be greatly impressed is if after something like this happens, a conversation doesn't happen, some action happens. Or the conversation is to pull people in for direct action related to how things fit within the institution. So I sometimes feel like higher ed lends itself on having conversations and then pats itself on the back as something having been done. And I think that we really truly have to move beyond that if this work is going to get done. And folks have to start doing things and rooting those things in research, in literature, in understanding of critical race theory and other sorts of foundational pieces that really sort of center folks of color, and then continue to do the work. So that would be my answer to that.
Let's get on that. Let me ask you that question, because I'm going to get to the one about how do we continue. That's the last question I'm going to ask today, will be about what do we do from here? How do we continue this? I'm tired of talking. I've been talking a long time. You tired, but some of us been talking about this same stuff and living it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday for a long time. Okay, so we'll get to that final question that you asked, but how do you and others who happen to be people of color on this, you know, some of us are tired of always having to carry the wheel or carry the messaging on some of this work. And so I'm sensing that when I listen to some of you talking about, I've been in this 10 years and I'm tired. I've been in it 5 years and I'm tired. We've been in it 30 years and we're tired. How do we have these kind of conversations? How do we include others in this? And just talk a little bit about how we've got to this space where we feel like, you know, we're just sick and tired of having to be sick and tired about raising these kinds of issues.
I think for me personally, echoing some of the things that Alana said, it is about when people leave, particularly BIPOC folks, we're just like, oh, they weren't a right fit, or it was their time, or they're moving on to something more exciting, or whatever it is. And we don't stop to look at the pattern. If that's like the third person that I, you know, racially identifies as BIPOC has left, shouldn't we be assessing what's going on here? There's kind of like this idea that people just move on and that's what we do. We just move on to other roles because, you know, student affairs, people, you know, change jobs. And I've been in those positions. I've been in institutions where people keep leaving and there's no conversation or addressing the elephant in the room of like, how come all these people keep leaving? And we're not having conversations about that. And for me personally, I struggle with that because as somebody that identifies as Afro-Latina and as a woman of color, finding that community and then having those people consistently leave brings trauma. And then you feel like, well, if they're on the chopping block, if they're going to leave, I'm probably next. So you live with these fears, you live with this anxiety, and there's no, again, if leadership is not willing to have those kind of conversations about how to, you know, retain folks, and then talking about, I saw a lot of statements come out about this action step of recruiting more staff and faculty of color and doing all these changes now, wanting to ramp up diversity recruitment. And it's like, you couldn't even keep the folks there that were doing amazing work. You couldn't even keep those folks there. So we need to pause and go back to what Alana was saying about how do you really address the root of the issue before you bring on all these folks who are gonna leave eventually anyways, because we haven't fixed the environment. We haven't fixed the environment yet. So for me, it's definitely uprooting all these issues and really addressing that and really being able to assess what is the problem before we start trying to talk about actions that involve recruiting or diversifying racially, because I know for a fact I've been in those spaces. I've been there. I've been the one leaving, right? I've been through this. So for me, definitely really taking a hard look at what the institution is doing. And a radical, I think for me, a radical action would be reaching out to folks and saying, we want to talk to you about why you left this institution, right? Because these exit interviews are very planned, they're very human resource focused, and it doesn't get to the, I was asked questions that don't really get to the root of why I left. So really being, those to me are radical things, right? Being able to understand why people are leaving and leaving in mass exodus, like we need to be able to find out why. And if not, people are going to keep leaving. You can keep recruiting, but they're going to keep leaving. So for me, changing that environment.
Let's lean into student affairs a little bit before we get into some of the other parts of this conversation. So what are the things within student affairs that we can sort of improve and evaluate from a social justice lens? What are some of the things that need to be improved within our field, since Dr. Elmore talked about, sometimes we walk around, and I know I always wear this badge of honor of just because I've come through this, running around like I'm student-centered. I know some of the most unstudent-centered people have come from within our culture. You know, we've got to get them out. So the reality is, how do we improve some of what we do and what needs to be improved from sort of a social justice kind of lens? That's for anyone on the panel to sort of talk about.
Well, you know, I think there are a few things that, you know, certainly come to mind for me. Like I said, I think sometimes we can be full of ourselves, or at least I'll speak with me. You know, I can be oppressed by traditions at my institution or within student affairs in general. I can be oppressed by that. You know, I got to ask myself, we like to call ourselves practitioners, but, you know, I'm in an academic space where people are going to ask, you're a practitioner of what field, right? And that's going to be an important thing for people to think about. And, you know, how much are we diminishing ourselves in relation to the institution, and how much are we called upon, that sort of thing? We've got to really think about that. And I think in student affairs, we talk a lot about values, and we push values on people, but I'm not sure we always live by those. And then I got to come together with this very real sort of thing. And this is very real thing. And that is things like gifts and payments and money and everything else. They come with moral problems, and moral problems that we sometimes don't address in student affairs. You know, I also think that we don't spend the time, I said this earlier, dealing with the emotions that are out there, the anger, the distrust, the fear, the fatigue, and we go right to this other point. And I think you got to deal with that sort of stuff. And I'm saying this right now, this time around, and I've had, if I did my, you know, my resume of the bullshit I've had to put up with for years, it's long, it's very long. But, you know, this time I decided, let me try and make sure I deal with the emotions. But I also said, let me take some time to assess the communities I'm in. And, you know, I've been doing a lot of community soul searching in communities. There are a lot of them. So, you know, I want to try and figure this out because it's clear. And I don't think that we acknowledge this. There are fragments in the identities that I have, right? The people who I identify with, they are fragmented in communities. And I'm trying to make sure that I identify what those fragments are, try to make sure that I can connect with those, and also to understand the ideas, the beliefs, the activities that go along with that fragmenting. You know, it's not a one-way sort of thing. And it is, you know, I'm certainly finding that there's a lot of generational things. I don't believe in generations, but I understand that people will draw generational lines on some of these things. And you know, I'm finding that I have to deal within in a lot of the communities where I'm at. You know, for example, where is our leadership on some of this sort of stuff? Is there something like a Black leadership right now? And by the way, I understand it's developing. It always does. Movements have that. We want leadership right away, and it takes some time for that sort of stuff to happen. So, you know, I've got to come to grips with that. So those are some of the things I think from a student affairs standpoint, some things we can work on and we can improve.
Others?
I think I have it from two ways, and I'll be quick because I definitely want B to chime in as well. I think from the sort of organizational perspective, I think we've talked a lot about, or I've been in circles that talk a lot about that in student affairs and maybe in higher ed in general, we don't do a very good job of training professionals around supervision. And I think we do even worse than to think about then how do, you know, what is the intercultural sort of dynamics of supervising someone that is not of the identities that you are in, specifically around race. And I think that that's a big place and piece where things go wrong and experiences happen that are not safe. There's an article that has been circulating around, it's on Medium and it's based on some research, and it's called When Black Women Go from Office Pet to Office Threat. And I think that that's a reality of, I know my experience as a Black woman in higher education. And that has been from white women and white men, right? So it's equal opportunity. And so I think that recognizing that's a critical piece of your supervisor is supposed to be the person that you work with, that you connect with. I think of, shout out to my supervisor at MIT, Leah Flynn. She's a white woman who is amazing and has become a very good friend to me. And sort of I see her as sort of an example of how you do it right, as a white woman who was supervising me as a Black woman. So I think, but she did the work to understand what my experiences were and to lean in and to also recognize when she made mistakes. So I think it can be done, but I don't think we're talking about that has to be a critical piece of what is happening. The second piece of it, I think, is where folks, particularly white folks, feel like their responsibility is in relation to supporting Black and Brown students, and engaging with them. And I will just say this quick story that at an institution that I was at several years ago during commencement weekend, I had a white colleague come up to me and talk about some experience that she had over the weekend that was around, I think it was like Black kids in the arts. And she was like, well, why don't we do that here? Now you have to understand, I worked in student activities. I didn't work in our sort of intercultural center. And I had to name to the person, like, why are you telling me this? Because I'm Black? Like, why can't you do it? Like and the person was several levels above me, right? So there was sort of the institutional leadership that they amassed at the institution that they could have went to the dean or the vice president and said, hey, I got this great idea, can we do it? But instead they came to me, who was a mid-level professional, right? So I think it's also thinking about and querying and questioning for white folks, like, where do you fall in terms of your responsibility and roles in supporting students of color? And when do you relinquish that onto Brown folks, and when do you take it on for yourself?
Because if you had been different, you could have been shattered by something like that. Mm-hmm. And so I'm so grateful to see that you're still standing and can tell that story, because that's going to be helpful to other people who may be struggling with that. That notion of always being the one who is blamed and or called for those kinds of things. I saw that I saw other of the panelists who wanted to chime in here. Brianna,
yeah, I do. Yes, thanks, Keith. I feel that there's a couple of different components that I think are really problematic, that white people really need to acknowledge their agency and responsibility in evaluating these pieces. So if white people had the agency to start these structures, they have the agency to help dismantle them, and that is their responsibility. So white privilege needs to start shifting to white responsibility. We also need to look at, in terms of our job descriptions and things like that, stopping sort of the attitude of it's not in my job description or it isn't my job to do that. This is not only the work of cultural centers. Cultural centers are there to support students who are within those affinity groups. They are not there to do the work for everybody to learn and unlearn information. So that is in all of our job descriptions, whether you see it written there or not. And to echo some of the components of training, if this starts at the human resources level of foundational training for people as they enter into the workforce, particularly as was mentioned about supervisory elements, that needs to be a component of that. We are in education. This is literally what we do for a job. So if we're in the system, we're seeing all the research come out, how are we leveraging the expert information, the research that's coming out, people who work at our institutions of all backgrounds who can contribute to a conversation that is based in, facts, experience, emotion, history, culture, all of those things, which I think also needs to go back. And I was fortunate to be in Jane's program at Central, where we did actually talk about these things. And I know a lot of people who come from higher ed programs where you don't touch this with a 10-foot pole. That needs to shift. If we want to see people who are working in positions in student affairs, who are capable of having these conversations, who are able to support their team no matter what their racial background is, then we need to be talking about it, obviously from K all the way through 12, but absolutely in higher education programs. This is our work, this is our responsibility, and it needs to be infused in every single program. Not to mention, once we actually shift into doing the work, it needs to be built into every sort of training, every sort of onboarding system about what those expectations are, so that we can create a culture where when we do hire people and we do expand what our diverse array of hiring practices is, that it is actually about equity with a foundation to support those people 1,000% once they start, so they won't leave.
So I see Becky over there trying to give me the, I know we have just a few minutes left on this panel. And I know, Faustina, you wanted to make a comment, so why don't you do that? And then I'm going to move into that final question so that we can, because I've seen the chats and I see that there are over 200 of you on this call. So it'll be fascinating to be able to get out into these groups and have conversations with everyone who's been chatting it up so much. So, Faustina, why don't you add to this? Then we'll ask the final question and we'll move into the rooms.
Yeah, very quickly. I actually just wanted to elevate some of the great conversations that are happening in the chat, and want to note that some folks are saying like, oh, other duties as assigned, are these taxing things that you're working with students of color, and as a person of color, you're taking on all this labor. And for a lot of the time, other duties as assigned for BIPOC folks is that work, is that social justice work, is that diversity, equity, inclusion work on campus, despite whatever functional area you work in. I have seen it. I have worked in multiple functional areas throughout my 10 years, and those other duties as assigned always ends up, falling on my lap. Whether, Faustina, can you sit on that diversity committee? Faustina, can you be the, whatever person on this hiring committee? So also reevaluating that, what Alana had said earlier, this is everybody's work. You should not be tapping certain people to do the hard work that you should be doing and that you should be advocating for as well, despite whatever functional area that person may work in. Really just looking at yourself and really evaluating what heavy lifting you could do to make some of our lives easier, and that it is everybody's work and that it's shared. Another piece to that too is really, really careful not making assumptions. I think that I feel like it needs to be said, even though it should feel like we're moving along, but not making assumptions about where people work. I can't tell you how many times I have never worked in a Latinx cultural center, and people always assume that's where I work. And that is extremely problematic. So please don't assume that people of color work in multicultural affairs are only like, that's where we have value. We have value, and we bring things to every different functional area in student affairs. I feel like without us, the wheels wouldn't be working. The wheels would not be spinning. So I think being really careful about what assumptions you're making about colleagues, especially when you're asking about certain communities or you're asking them their thoughts on certain populations. We can only speak from our experience. I can't speak for all certain communities, I think everybody would echo that. So just being mindful of that too. And again, job descriptions, like what Bree was saying, is really essential to really thinking about the labor that you're going to be putting on this person as well. And I would say, just for, we can continue talking about this in our breakouts, but also for BIPOC folks, really advocating for yourself. When there's ambiguity, advocate for yourself. Like, I need clarity on what this means. I need clarity on, what do you mean that I'm going to have to work with these departments? In what capacity? What am I going to be doing for them? What does that look like? Really advocate for yourself for all that extra labor that you're going to be taking on.
So I am just so fascinated by this incredible panel. So I know when we get inside these sessions, it'll be even more impressive. So given all this heightened awareness and all these things that many of my colleagues who've never wanted to even approach me about these kinds of conversations before have right now, how do we sustain these conversations and turn them to actions moving forward? And so that'll be the last question that we ask on our way into the breakout sessions. I see Becky has her hand on her. Did you want us to close now, or can we answer that question?
Yeah, let's answer it. Absolutely.
All right.
Dr. Motley, you broke up, so can you just repeat it, because you broke out for me.
I'm sorry, I was moving away only because I thought I saw Becky giving me a high sign. The question is really the one that you talked about in the beginning. How do we sustain this effort? I'm tired of these cycles where we do this, we get upset, and then 10 years later we do it and we get upset. So I don't want to be looking at you in your 20th year and you're talking to me, telling me how frustrating it is to go through this. So how do we move forward, make sure we sustain this, make it into some really incredible actions that we can use, et cetera, and sustain this thing going forward? How do we do that? Instead of making it be something that we all will lament because we've seen it all before, So we have a wonderful opportunity here. What is our opportunity? Ken, did you want to start us out there?
I'll just say real quick, it's not very prescriptive, but I think it's important, and it just kind of rolls off of what Alana said. Now is the time. It's always been the time, but now, while we got the opportunity, I would say this: think big, think big, think big, and fight big. Think big and fight big. Now's not the time to play small. Think big and fight big.
Good.
I can go next. I can go next. I think it's thinking about these issues systemically and attacking them systemically. So it's I think to what Ken was saying around, you know, these are moral questions. These are questions that are rooted in the fabric of who we want to be as institutions, as organizations. So I think it's thinking about it from beyond I think the diversity, like I said, I think the diversity of an organization is important, but I think, you know, it's asking some critical questions. And I would encourage anyone to really look into the research within critical race theory as sort of a guiding structure. So, you know, I would want to be asking questions in a student affairs department about, you know, what is our approach in conduct? And how do we think about conduct and policing and how that affects specific populations? Also, let's look at our numbers of sanctions and who do we sanction and how do we sanction different identities and different students, right? Like, I think that these questions have to be looked at from a really granular level in terms of our policies and our practices and who they benefit and who they don't, because that's what we're really talking about. And then I think that when we think about HR, we think about hiring, you know, yes, it is hiring folks that look different, but it's also hiring folks that have a commitment to what Ken was saying, to the work. What are you asking in your interviews? How are you asking white candidates to do presentations about diversity and inclusion in positions that are not related to diversity and inclusion? And I think if you start to do those things and really live the work in a way that is consistent and structured in all of the things. So, you know, student activities is thinking about the acts that they're bringing and the representation within that. Like, if everybody is doing it, then it's not just the burden of the one office, the one person in the office to do all. And also, hopefully, then our students will see people that all support their experiences, and that, yes, maybe still the Black students will come to me because they see me as a place of support, but they won't be afraid to go to my colleagues because they won't feel like they're going to be triggered or harmed from it. So that would be my answer.
Can I jump in with one more piece of controversy to follow in on that? You know, and again, I'm going back to being student affairs practitioners and everything that we do in our colleges, our universities, and what we do here. I'm also saying too, push aside all of this jargon we have been messing with. Let's talk about what we mean. I have watched things go up to diversity and inclusion when we know we need to be talking about Black folk, right? When we know we gotta be talking about queer folk, right? You know, we just gotta get real about this stuff. I am saying yes to NASPA. I'm saying yes to ACP. I'm saying yes around here where I work as well. Push all that stuff aside and let's talk for real about what we're talking about here. We got so many euphemisms. We got so much by way of jargon. We don't have real conversations, and we just mold it to something somebody else told us, somebody else said, somebody was able to put some good spin on, and even sometimes the research isn't even respectable on this sort of stuff. Let's get real about this stuff. Let's talk about what we're talking about here, you know, and I think that's that other way. Hold people in the conversations, keep people in the conversations, and have very real conversations. Let's stop all that stuff. You know, I try hard not to use the words diversity and inclusion because I just don't believe in them. I don't think they tell us what we're trying to do here. And I've been really, far from all of that stuff. You want to talk to me real about racism and real about the way Black folks are treated, real about the way our Native brothers and sisters are treated, real about the way our queer folks are treated? Come talk to me for real about that. Don't give me that NASPA stuff. I'm tired of it.
Oh my goodness, I thought it was just me. So
if Kevin Kruger were here, I'd tell him the same thing.
I can't understand the language of student affairs anymore. You know, sometimes when I come into the room, but I do know that what you said is so important. So, Rihanna, did we already talk to you? Did you have your comment?
I haven't. I think there are two pieces that I would recommend. One is starting with your faculty and staff, because if you don't support the faculty and staff, then it won't trickle down to the students. I know that I have seen that in terms of the expectation is so high on particularly staff over faculty as well, but the demands on time for faculty they're also unsustainable. But if you don't support faculty and staff, that doesn't trickle down to students. If you don't feel it there, then it won't get there. I also think that this is a time, although it was tragic to have the experience of COVID, which has upended everything in higher education, it has also given us the time to have to rethink everything we know about how we deliver care and service to our students, how we sort of think about our institution, how we structure our work environments. So let's take advantage of that and leverage this as an opportunity to sort of burn it down and start over. Because I think this is, as we've all identified, this is a systemic issue. Higher education is built on a racist, misogynistic structure that favors the wealthy. So let's start and look at all of these issues from a ground level. I know that might sound overwhelming, but we literally have been doing it for the last 3 months. So let's talk about that in a very real way, because we already have established that we're capable of doing it. If we can take down the statues, we can take down the structures. So let's get real about that as a factor as well, and start identifying where we need to radically revise, all of the things that we have been doing in terms of higher education and specifically student affairs.
So we're sending, you are going over to Tufts?
Yes.
Hey, Faustina, bring us home.
Just to kind of wrap that thought out, I agree with Bree, and I feel like those folks who don't want to change, that want to, uphold status quo, need to go. And making those tough decisions is, if there's leadership in this Zoom, you need to make the hard decisions. You need to make the hard decisions. You need to coach people out of positions. You need to start having conversations with people who are not doing the work that they're supposed to be doing, that they were hired to do. You need to stop making those tough decisions. Because if we are going to do what everyone has been talking about here, reevaluating, changing the way we do things, finally really uprooting the issues that, higher ed was built on, then we need to get rid of some people who have been upholding the status quo, who have been creating these oppressive environments, who have been upholding policies that have, caused people of color to leave, have created toxic environments for some of us. They need to go. And we want that accountability. We want to see those changes. I left higher ed recently, and I'm not coming back until I see drastic changes. I'm just not. So I know I speak for other colleagues of color who have left the field for similar reasons. We want to see those toxic people go, period.
Well, amen, amen, and amen. So listen, this has been incredible serving with you on this panel today. I'm looking forward to the discussions we're going to have in our breakouts. Becky, I'm sorry it was a little bit over, but you can't stop these kind of conversations. You can't have them in such a small amount of time when you have such incredibly talented people on a panel like this. So thank you all for, allowing me to be a part of it and to immerse myself back in student affairs today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone on the panel, and Dr. Motley for being an amazing moderator. And it was honestly really hard to stop this conversation. I think we could have kept on going, but I love what Ken said about real talk. I'm so about just being real, and I want to give everybody the opportunity who's on this call to have those real conversations today, right now, and to continue this conversation. So I want to make sure we don't lose anyone in translation. So the plan is that my colleague Alyssa has posted in the chat, and you also got it in the email that we sent to you, the options for you. And so these are brand new Zoom meetings. This is not, I'm not like pressing the button to like scatter you all where you're going to go and end up. You get to choose where you want to go. And we did that intentionally because we want you to connect in particular with the panelists that you want to learn learn more about based on the topic that they are addressing. So please take a look in the Zoom chat. I'm going to invite the panelists to go ahead and jump now into their rooms so they're ready to go. So everyone, and it does not matter what room you choose, and it doesn't matter who you are or your identity. We want everyone to take advantage of all of the rooms that you want to learn more about. So please make the click, choose which conversation you want to continue with. And we really appreciate everyone being here today. Just so you all know, you're going to be concluding in your breakout session. So this is it from officially from me as Mass NASPA to say thank you so much for coming. We really hope that this has ignited you all to take action, continue these conversations. We hope that you enjoy your ongoing conversations leading up, and feel free to give us any feedback that you have. We are also going to be sending out an assessment form to you because we want to continue to have these great opportunities. We want your feedback so we can continue to give you what you are looking for. So with that, I'm going to invite you all to join a new Zoom meeting. If you do want to stay with Ken Elmore, you are going to stay in this room. And I will be continuing to stay in this room as well. So if you're looking to stay and talk with Ken Elmore, please stay in this room. If you are interested in going to another room, please do that now. And we'll allow for like 2 minutes to get everybody transitioned.
Try and bring some music in here next time.
I know it. Well, it's such a struggle with this mute and unmute situation, so I can only do one thing at a time. Ken, I think you're good if you want to proceed. And for my sanity, and because there's far fewer people in this room, I'm going to unmute you all. But if you could just like mute yourself if you're not talking, I would appreciate that. But like muting and unmuting is a time. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
What?
So, this is fantastic. Thank you for joining us here. And, we're looking at balancing those personal and professional identities and actions. It's something I think we all experience, and it's probably something we experience in different ways. And, certainly nowadays it might be a bit of a challenge. Well, actually, I think maybe in the last few years of social media, it might be even more of a challenge. We all are in spaces where we have to be ourselves, live our lives, and at the same time, too, not live our lives. I've always thought that this COVID situation is very interesting. When people started talking about wearing masks, I started to say to myself, well, I wear a mask all the time. It's just now I got to put a face covering over it, right? And I think many of you can probably tell those stories too about how you got to do that and how you've got to balance off living a life and living your life. And probably all of you are in some sort of way in a spotlight for a variety of reasons, whether it be about your identity, whether it be about your identity and your position, whether it be about where you live, who you associate with. I mean, the whole host of things. I took, and I'll just say briefly, and then I want to throw some questions out there. I took this from a standpoint, probably because of the moment around race. And I think about the first times in my life when I had to really deal with my professional self versus what was happening in the society, meaning having to go through life, go through workplace situations, be in relationships and identities with other people, and where there were the challenges. And, you know, it goes way back. For me, the first time I was real cognizant of that might have been around the time that Ronald Reagan was elected. I happen to think Ronald Reagan allowed us to be our worst selves in so many different ways. And the society went right with that. Michael Stewart was I think one of those times when I was super cognizant of a male being killed by police in a seemingly needless way, and you know, being able to and needing to socialize and interact with a variety of people was really tough. Rodney King, George Bush getting reelected, Katrina, the rise of the Tea Party, and I think I'd say the disrespect of Obama. All were those sorts of things that always put me in these really weird circumstances with my colleagues, with others, in terms of how I needed to interact. You know, certainly for a lot of reasons, whether it be because of my Blackness, or whether it be because I'm on all the time given my position. You know, I at least feel, and I get indices of this, that my personal life is always on scrutiny. I get so many complaints about the way I dress, the things I do, who I associate with, the restaurants and bars that I go into. It's amazing how many complaints come my way. And I also get plenty of mail. I can't tell you the number of times I've been called a monkey through some anonymous piece of mail based upon some observation that people have had. You know, but you've got to really balance that. And at the same time, too, I feel like I'm a person who does live his life. And I feel like I'm a person who's not afraid to live my life. And I am really cognizant, too, that there are consequences of trying to be a person who lives their life. I don't know if you can see it, but in my office, I've got this huge picture of Jack Johnson. He was a boxer from the early last century, and he was someone that people said lived his Blackness and just did not care. He is a model, not because of boxing, but I like that he just lived his life. And he lived his life at a much more dangerous time. He lived his life at a time when the consequences of his life were far more severe. And I say, hey, I want to be like Jack Johnson. I want to be like Fannie Lou Hamer. I want to be like a lot of those folks. You know, the other piece too is I point out that given this, I'm always trying to make sure that I connect back to my culture. And I think I come out of what people would probably call a Black folk culture. I try to connect back to Black folk culture to look at those instances where people resisted. And so, you know, for me, that's when I go back to the Jack Johnsons, the Fannie Lou Hamers, the Meg Jamesons, and all those other folks who were able to do that. So, you know, it's a really complicated thing, being a professional, being a student affairs professional, who may have certain identities that are very strong to you, and who want to also just live a life. That's really hard overall. And then when you start adding all those things, there it is. So, you know, let me throw this out, because, you know, we've been dealing with it, especially with social media and a lot of things too. You know, should we separate our personal actions and our interests from our workplaces? Should we do that? Can we do that? And what I'd say is, if you could use that raise hand function or physically raise your hand, let's see if we can try and organize this and call on you if you'd like to. So, you know, I'll go with that again. Should we as higher education professionals separate our personal actions and interests from the workplace? Should we? Can we? How do you do that? And do you do that? Do you even care? And have you even thought about it? Come on now.
Now, it might be a muting thing. So I clicked on mute all. So can someone else talk just to make sure I did it right?
So I left and came back in, and I have control again. But if I hit mute, it goes back into that host controlling mute thing. So I'm just going to leave myself unmuted for now. Perhaps others are experiencing the same issue. We can't hear Ken.
All right. All right, let's unmute ourselves. Everybody go ahead and unmute. The host is asking you to unmute. Can you do that? And then go ahead and just raise your hand if you want to say a little something, and we'll see if we can recognize you there. Dennis, do you want to say something?
Can everyone? Yeah, so what I wanted to say quickly, Dr. Dennis Camacho, Chief Academic Officer at BFIT. You know, if we go back to our grad days where we were all preparing to enter the field, We went through all these theories, student development theories, this, student development theories, that. And the one thing that resonates for me is a common theme was do no harm to students, right? That's one thing that we were always taught, that we are there to ensure that we're not doing any harm. Now, I know back then when the theories were created, and I'm not talking about the recent, critical race theories and all that good stuff. I'm talking about the traditional theories for the traditional American college student population. I know they weren't designed to fit what is happening today, which is the diversification of the traditional American college student population on our campuses, and how our campuses are struggling to retain students from underrepresented groups all across the country. So having said that, we focus on the fact that our duty or call to duty is to ensure that we are providing a safe educational environment for our students and do no harm to students, that we can redefine what those theories essentially meant when they were established and adapt them to today. Because what we do essentially by, throughout the whole panel discussion, the one thing that I thought about and I posted in the chat was that, the more and more underrepresented students from underrepresented groups we get, the more and more we hear them talking and saying, you know what, it's not enough to say you care. We need to act on that caring. And now there's talks about these care models and acting on exactly what it means to be inclusive and equitable on these campuses. So the challenge today, and particularly as higher ed is going into a redefining phase with this whole pandemic and being questioned for the cost value proposition, is, really, what does it mean to really provide a safe educational environment for our students? What does it really mean to care? What does it really mean to do no harm to our students? Because I think when we ignore some of these things, or when institutions, sweep some of these things under the rug as it pertains to equity and inclusion and social justice, I think in many cases, students are claiming, and research and reports and media are claiming, that it does more harm than good.
Well, Dennis, let me just ask you this. You're one person, and you surely don't speak for the whole institution. I mean, what do you do? How do you handle this notion that that's the case and that you're not pulling your weight because of your role in the institution? I mean, we all work for institutions that can seem in the society, especially right now, like really bad actors. So how do we deal with this? Do we quit? I mean, what do we do?
Great question, because it wears on a lot of us. And you're one of my mentors and friends, as is Dr. Motley, what have you. And I'm mentoring other young professionals now who are already saying 10 years or 12 years that we heard it in the panel discussion, I'm ready to quit. I'm like, yeah, I hear you, but it's a longer battle, and there are seniors up here that can help you through this so that you don't quit, because we need the soldiers out there to be on these campuses to remind the campuses that there is a duty to validate the identity of these students systemically to change the culture. Many cases, and this is a frustrating part, and it was mentioned also during the panel discussion, are folks from who are professionals, staff, faculty from underrepresented groups are the ones that are often tapped to deal with these situations when it comes to diversity. Or institutions are quick to develop a diversity 101 course or courses. That's not the answer. It's a systemic approach that myself, as I've been blessed to move up in the ranks, that as I go up, I try not to forget the fact that I cannot compromise values when it comes to my personal and professional experiences as a member of an underrepresented group, and continue to wave that banner along with allies and those folks that are not allies, to get us to a place where we can have the hard conversations. And most recently, as I moved to the chief academic officer position, and all these unfortunate instances are happening within this political climate and pandemic and all this other stuff, more conversation being had more and more, which is, in my 21 years in the field and in NASPA, as you know, more presidents are talking about real issues regarding underrepresented groups, because it's hitting the bottom line for institutions not being able to retain students from underrepresented groups, because those are the ones that are more and more coming. So it's easier said than done, but particularly in this room that you're moderating, when it talks about our personal values and professional, we cannot forget that our personal values and learn how to navigate and properly advocate politically for continuing to have the hard conversations to affect change, cultural change on college campuses.
I see Emily Austin Brooms. Go ahead.
Hi, and thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation so far, so I really appreciate all the work that you're doing and your perspective. Quite frankly, in response to your question, you know, I struggle with this. I work in alumni relations, and I feel like it's a lot of, you know, hurry up and wait. You know, personally, I'm ready to go and take that action, but I have to wait for the rest of the campus or the rest of the leadership or whomever else to catch up or to be ready for it, or, you know, waiting to make sure that my message is in alignment with theirs, or, you know, so I feel like a lot of times I just get stalled and I don't know where else to go from there. So, you know, we've been talking for, you know, quite a lot recently about, you know, engaging more alumni of color. And the truth of the matter is, while they were students at our institution, they probably didn't feel so great about their experience on campus. So how can we do that so that the students of color on our campus can identify with the alumni that they will be in just a few more years, you know, and see themselves in those successes and everything like that. And, you know, one of the things that I've been most frustrated with is not being given the time and space to actively pursue that. It's like, oh yeah, sure, go ahead and do it. But you've got all this other stuff, you know, that still takes priority. And it's, but that needs to be crafted carefully, and it's got to be authentic and genuine. But that also needs to be given space and time to identify and foster those relationships, etc. And so it's been very tough. You know, I just feel a lot of, you know, hurry up and wait. That's the best way I can explain it.
I see Liam Rice.
I would absolutely want to echo what Emily was saying too. So I'm a newer professional and manages basically all of our department's social media. And so when we're talking about personal values and professional values, I feel like it's tied up a lot, especially as Dennis was saying earlier about being these soldiers on the front lines working with our students. You're getting all that student feedback directly, and you're trying to navigate your personal values with the professional values that you were in some cases being told what they need to be. So I find myself really leaning on my mid-level professionals at my institution far more so than my more senior level professionals, just because of that power dynamic that usually exists between being an entry-level professional and then your vice president or dean, you're trying to bring these personal values up and being like, this is what we need to do, which is a tough thing to do with someone who is so much your senior. And also really trying to figure out what's the role of yourself as an employee, right? So we have a whole bunch of petitions going around our institution right now. And the conversations that we've been having is what's our ability to sign those petitions as individuals? So obviously not signing it as yeah, this is the office, but if I wanted to sign a petition about something at my community, at my college, am I allowed to? Professionally, maybe not. Personally, yeah. And how your institution is kind of monitoring how that works with you, right? So really emphasizing, I think, what Emily was talking about with we know the work that we want to do, like we've been saying for the past hour and a half, but it's I think tough sometimes.
Liam, what school are you with?
Emmanuel College, Boston.
Emmanuel. And Emily, what school are you with?
Fitchburg State in Massachusetts.
So you know, Liam, one of the things that we sometimes, I think sometimes we forget about as being important to this conversation is the ability for us to express ourselves. You know, it is so human, the ability to express ourselves, right? To dress the way we want, to positions that we want, to sort of be in the world. You know, that's human. You know, human expression is paramount. And then most certainly for, I think, the political conversations that happen, and especially for, I just think for everybody, that's it. And, you know, I think sometimes we get lost in the conversation about free speech on our campuses. And you know, anybody who knows me knows that I fight to the hilt for free speech, because ultimately, I, as a Black male in my life, have done really well with free speech. And so, you know, we sometimes will poo-poo those conversations about free speech, or we engage them in a certain way to sort of shut it down a little bit, when it's a really important thing. You know, right now, our free speech is really paramount to advancing the conversation about whether you call it diversity, inclusion, Blackness, racism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We need those protections so that you can sign that petition without reparations. I'm sorry, without repercussions, so that you can engage in these conversations and be able to say, well, wait a minute. We have a policy here at the institution where we all agreed, no matter how painful it would be, here it is. You know, unfortunately, during the last year when we were having these conversations, and I'm going to categorize this, I think the right was pushing this forward and beating us to death on it. And now it's come full circle where we say, no. We really do need to be able to do this so that we're not being punished for going out to a rally, to a march, or a celebration, you know, in recent days, whatever it might be, with repercussions. So, you know, one of the things I would give as advice is check it out. What's your institution's free speech approach, and don't poo-poo those as being really important. And especially if we think about the history of dissent and freedom fighting and everything else, free speech has been really important for us to be able to do what we're doing right now. But we sometimes put it on the back burner, and we sometimes poo-poo it. So please don't do that. All right, let's take some more hands here. Come on now, I know folks got stuff to say. Yes, I can't see your name, but I see your hand. You're wearing fabulous pair of glasses.
That's me.
There you go. There you go.
Hi, my name is Janet Hagan, and I come from the faculty perspective.
Hey.
I teach at Three Rivers Community College. I teach English, and I teach gender and women's studies, and I also teach part-time at the University of Rhode Island, gender and women's studies. And I wanted to just talk about a couple of things. And by the way, thank you for all you're doing, because this is always on my mind when I'm teaching. It has been forever. But you were asking earlier about authenticity. Does it matter how we live our lives outside of, and I'm going to say, the classroom? Absolutely. I think 100%. It would be hard for me to go into the classroom and not honestly believe in what I teach. So if I'm, you know, for example, teaching American literature, I bring in a diverse range of authors. I want to give everybody a voice. If we have conversations, one of the things in my classrooms too, I'll bring in myself and what I've been doing. So right now, let's say I've been in protest for Black Lives Matter. I think that gives me a real sense of the importance of it when I'm involved, and I'll talk about it in the classroom, you know, and talk to students about it. So I think, you know, and I read the books outside of classroom, I read the theory. I just think it'd be hard to be authentic in the classroom if I wasn't actively engaged in it. I also wanted to talk about, I'm gonna lose my train of thought. Supporting diversity and challenging systemic oppression from the faculty level. I think that's something that really needs to happen. And I don't know, I don't have an answer for it, because how do you get faculty to take a look at what they're teaching and how they're teaching to be more inclusive? And, you know, I always work on that, and I'm not perfect. I'm always conscious of, I'm a white person in front of the classroom. How am I connecting to the students? Am I saying the right things? Am I creating an open and inclusive environment for conversations? And so I'm wondering too, what other faculty are doing, because if they're just getting it in 1 or 2 classes, they're not feeling supported on campus if they're not hearing, you know, their history and their lives represented in their classes. And so another thing, one more thing that I struggle with is, you know, we are told that, and I understand this, that we're in the classroom, we can't be political. In other words, students can't know what our political affiliations are. And I'm aware of that, but yet students will automatically know when I'm teaching a gender and women's studies class or my other classes in literature, because of the way I approach the material. And I know I've had some students say, I didn't think this was a class on race. It's supposed to be on American literature, which, you know, and I've had some students that will drop out because it's challenging their political belief systems because they may not see, depending on their leanings, that race is an issue. So those are just some of my comments and things that I am constantly thinking about.
You know, if I can just do two things here. I mean, first off, Janet, I thank you. You know, I'm one of these people, again, I'm gonna go controversial on folks here. I'm one of these people who always says, whenever I see statements coming out from colleges and universities, or, you know, from NASPA and other folks, I say, you know what, we're a bunch of bureaucrats. I don't want to hear from the bureaucrats. I want the faculty to take the power that the faculty have. This is about wars of ideas. This is what we are looking at. And I say to faculty, look, you tell your president, let me write that statement because I'm in the classroom, I'm doing the research, I'm doing the experiential thing out there. You, Mr. President, Mr. Dean of Students, however you might be, you're a bureaucrat. You're here to support me. And so let the people who do the professional sort of thing do their thing overall. And our thing as faculty members are to engage in these ideas and push forward these ideas. You know, secondly, you know, I always love when people say, well, we can't expose our politics and all that sort of stuff. It just occurred to me as I'm looking around my office, I'm sure you around my office. I think if you see my office, just walk in my office, you don't know what my politics are. I don't have to tell you what my politics are for you to see what's up here, you know? So it's just such a sophomoric thing for people to be thinking that way, that they're not going to know people's politics and that I can't be effective at teaching subject matter based upon it. People are going to know your politics, but again, it gets right back to that whole thing. How do you live your life and do your work when you are a human being? And then, Lily, why don't I give you that last word? You talked about the nursing perspective. You're like right on the front lines of all this sort of stuff. Race, healthcare.
Hi, Lily. Hi, it's Lily. I actually teach with Janet, and so I teach nursing in a community college, and I understand what she's saying about political views. I also appreciate you. I was at one of your orientations for students. My son went to your college, and you know, it's a great college. Okay, so I believe as a nurse, you're taught not to compartmentalize. Excuse me, not to be judgmental, but we also teach students to compartmentalize when they go to work, right? So what I've learned over the years is that I am non-judgmental in both my life and with patients and with students. But I also do compartmentalize all my other life when I go to work because I have to be non-judgmental. Now, with that being said, I had a huge aha with having the protest movement, right? I believed for a long time, part of the issue going on with students is nobody protests. No, everybody accepts, right? You just accept. I'm like, how is the world ever going to change? You might notice I'm a little older. Okay, so this is a good thing, but I also realized I have a social media account, right? Okay, so that I can stay connected to people, and I have to be careful there with my posts, even though if you look, actually, you will see that what my opinion is, actually, you know, that I do believe Black Lives Matter. And I'm learning that you really do have to use the real words. You have to use words with authority. Black, queer, you know, I mean, you have to use those words with authority. So that is something that I am learning at this point in time, which even though I've always been non-judgmental, I'm now able to articulate certain things better. And again, you know, it is an interesting life we lead with what we can say and say in groups of people, and how far can we take it in social media?
You all have very difficult jobs. I wouldn't want them. How about that? Hey, listen, folks, we do have to go. I guess I'll just leave you with, hey, let's go for manifestations of global health and justice and peace for us all. All the best to you. Thank you for being in this space. I'm so glad we could do this together. And you know what I'm gonna do? I just took a screenshot. I'm gonna invite us all to a cocktail party. How about that? So you're gonna get a Zoom invitation from me so that we can have some cocktails. So I took your screen so I can get your name, and I'm gonna email you an invitation. End of the day, we're gonna share some wine and some more conversation. Peace, folks.
Wait, my name is Janet Hagan. If you said you couldn't see my name.
Oh, I wrote it down when you said so.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you, Kim. Take care, everybody.
Bye, Lily.
Thank you, Dean Elmore.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Keep talking. Be real, right, Ken?
Bye, Janet.
Be real.